Before anyone called it an accident, before reports were written, timelines debated, or conclusions locked in, there was a gym that had already gone quiet. A place filled with noise every day, sneakers squeaking, whistles blowing, teenagers laughing, was suddenly holding a secret it would never explain on its own. In that silence, something didn't make sense. Not a scream, not a struggle, just absence, a missing student, a space everyone assumed was ordinary. At Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia, January 10, 2013 began like any other school day, until it didn't. When staff traced the silence back to the gym, they didn't find a locker left open or a backpack on the floor. They found 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson where no one was ever meant to be found, alone, inverted, sealed inside a rolled-up wrestling mat. The explanation came quickly, too quickly. An accident, they said, a freak moment, a tragic mistake, case closed before the questions could even breathe. But accidents don't usually leave this many doubts behind, they don't fracture families, they don't survive for over a decade, refusing to fade. Because when you look closer, at the timeline, the injuries, the evidence that vanished, you start to understand why Kendrick's parents never accepted the answer they were given. Why this case still echoes far beyond that gym floor. Here, at True Crime Archive, we don't retell stories to move on from them, we dig into what was buried, question what was rushed, and shine light on what was left in the dark, and as you'll soon see, the real mystery isn't just how Kendrick Johnson died, it's why the truth still feels out of reach. Before Kendrick Johnson became a headline, a hashtag, or a case debated online, he was just a teenage boy living an ordinary life that felt full of promise. 17 years old, a junior at Lowndes High School, a student athlete who spent most of his time thinking about practice schedules, upcoming games, and what the future might hold after graduation. To the people who knew him best, Kendrick wasn't reckless or careless. He was focused, competitive, driven in the way young athletes often are when they believe sports can open doors their families never had before. Kendrick loved basketball. He trained constantly, talked about improving his strength and speed, and had hopes of continuing athletics beyond high school, possibly in college. Football was also part of that dream. According to his family, he wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing opportunity. The kind that could help him support his parents and protect his younger siblings. At home, Kendrick was described as respectful and disciplined, a young man who understood responsibility early. He checked in with his parents, stayed close to his family, and carried himself with a seriousness that stood out for someone his age. Friends and relatives remember him as energetic but grounded. The type of student teachers recognized, not because he caused trouble, but because he showed up. The type of teammate coaches trusted to put in the work. Family photos from this time show a smiling teenager in jerseys and casual clothes, surrounded by loved ones, looking exactly like thousands of other American high school students with dreams still forming and a future that felt wide open. That familiarity is part of what makes this case so unsettling. Kendrick Johnson wasn't living on the edge. He wasn't isolated, he wasn't a mystery kid, he was someone every parent watching this recognizes instantly. On the morning of January 10, 2013, Kendrick followed his normal routine. Public records and school accounts confirm he arrived at Lowndes High School early, as he often did, planning to attend gym class. Like many students, he stored his belongings in the school gym. Wrestling mats, large, heavy, and rolled upright, were commonly used by students as makeshift storage, a practice that had reportedly gone on for some time. Shoes, gym clothes, personal items were sometimes dropped inside the center openings. It was routine, familiar, unremarkable. But that ordinary routine would later become central to the official explanation of his death. Authorities would state that Kendrick attempted to retrieve a pair of shoes from inside one of those mats, lost his balance, and became trapped. That explanation, released by the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office and supported by the initial ruling from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, framed Kendrick's death as a tragic accident. No foul play, no suspects, no unanswered questions, at least on paper. For Kendrick's family, that conclusion never aligned with the son they knew, a strong athlete, a teenager used to physical exertion. Someone who, in their words, would have found another way before putting himself in such danger. As days passed and more details emerged, from autopsy findings to inconsistencies in timelines, the gap between the official narrative and the family's understanding of Kendrick only widened. Publicly available records, including the initial coroner's report, investigative summaries released by the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office, and subsequent independent autopsies commissioned by the Johnson family, would later fuel national attention and controversy. Media coverage from outlets such as CNN, The New York Times, and public court filings would turn Kendrick's name into a symbol of something larger, a case where an ordinary teenager's death raised extraordinary questions about procedure, accountability, and whether the full truth had ever been pursued. At this stage, though, none of that had unfolded yet. Kendrick Johnson was still just a missing student in a gym. A son whose parents expected him home, a young man with plans that never included becoming the center of a national debate, and that is the foundation of this story, the reminder that before the theories, the arguments, and the official statements, there was a real life abruptly interrupted. A life that looked painfully familiar, and that familiarity is exactly why this case refuses to fade away. January 10, 2013 began like any other day for Kendrick Johnson. The streets of Valdosta, Georgia were quiet in the early morning, frost lingering on the sidewalks, a thin mist rising from the lawns as students and parents made their way toward Lowndes High School. Kendrick arrived on campus shortly after the first bell, backpack slung over his shoulder, basketball sneakers in hand, carrying the kind of energy and focus that marked him as both a serious student and a dedicated athlete. He greeted a few classmates on his way through the familiar corridors, exchanged brief nods with teachers who already recognized him, and made his way toward the old gym, a building most students considered unremarkable but one that held decades of school memories within its walls. Inside that gym, the routine was simple. Wrestling mats, rolled tightly and stacked along the walls, doubled as temporary storage for students' shoes and athletic gear. It was a practice no one questioned. After all, it had gone on for years. By mid-morning, Kendrick had joined the small group of students who had arrived early to prepare for gym class, heading straight for the mat area. Security cameras at the school, later reviewed, would show him walking down the gym hallway, alone, toward the mats. That footage, combined with eyewitness accounts from other students who passed by moments earlier, establishes that he was the last person seen entering that section of the gym. No one saw him after that. The moments between Kendrick walking toward the mat and the discovery hours later are the most critical and controversial in the entire case. According to the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office, students would later report hearing nothing unusual, no shouts, no cries for help. Yet the timeline reveals that by the time gym class officially began, Kendrick had not returned, and his absence began to draw attention. Staff members initially assumed he had gone to a locker, the restroom, or simply wandered toward the wrong class. Minutes stretched into longer periods, but the school's daily rhythm carried on, oblivious to the tragedy quietly forming in the gym. By mid-morning, when teachers and staff noticed that Kendrick had not appeared in his scheduled classes, concern began to mount. Attempts to locate him intensified. Students were questioned, the gym was checked, and eventually, attention focused on the rolled wrestling mats. What no one could have predicted was what those mats would reveal, a horrifying scene that would redefine the meaning of tragedy for one family, and spark questions that still remain unanswered to this day. The discovery of Kendrick Johnson inside a mat would shock the community and the nation, leaving parents, teachers, and students struggling to reconcile the ordinary boy they knew with the unimaginable circumstances of his death. For his family, arriving at that gym would mean confronting a reality no parent should ever face. Public records, including the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office incident reports and local news archives from the Valdosta Daily Times and CNN, detail the initial chaos, the rush of paramedics, and the immediate framing of the event as a tragic accident. However, eyewitness reports and subsequent investigations would later reveal inconsistencies in timelines, unanswered questions about how Kendrick could have ended up inside the mat, and injuries that seemed at odds with the official explanation. And yet, despite the authorities' attempt to classify the event quickly, the day's events left a permanent mark. Students whispered in hallways, parents rushed to the school, and the quiet of a normal January morning was shattered forever. Kendrick Johnson would never attend his afternoon classes, and by the end of the day, his family would be standing inside a gym that would change their lives forever. The ordinary routine of a teenage boy had collided with the extraordinary tragedy that would capture national attention, and the questions it raised about accountability and justice would only grow louder in the years to come. Almost immediately after Kendrick Johnson's body was discovered, the air around Lowndes High School thickened with questions. The official story, that a tragic accident had claimed the life of a promising teenager, was met with disbelief by the family, friends, and local community. Kendrick's parents, speaking publicly in interviews with outlets such as CNN and the New York Times, insisted that the explanation did not fit their son's athletic ability, physical strength, or familiarity with the gym. To them, the idea that a healthy, coordinated 17-year-old could accidentally become trapped in a wrestling mat seemed implausible. Concerns about negligence began to surface almost immediately. Public records show that the Johnson family filed a lawsuit against the Lowndes County School Board, alleging wrongful death and claiming the school had failed to maintain a safe environment. According to court documents, the family argued that unsafe storage of equipment, inadequate supervision, and a history of bullying or harassment may have contributed to Kendrick's death. The lawsuit framed the event not simply as a tragic accident, but as the result of systemic failures that the school and its administration had the power, and responsibility, to prevent. Social media and online communities quickly became amplifiers of suspicion. Posts, videos, and forum discussions debated whether the circumstances surrounding Kendrick's death were truly accidental. Local news reports, including coverage from the Valdosta Daily Times and national attention from CNN, highlighted both the tragedy and the growing doubts. Protesters gathered outside the school and at local government offices, demanding transparency and accountability. For a community used to ordinary school days, these events were unsettling, an ordinary gym now the center of a storm. No official suspects were ever named, yet the intensity of public scrutiny only grew. The GBI, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, conducted multiple reviews of the case, and media coverage repeatedly pointed out inconsistencies in the initial reports, timelines, and autopsy findings. While authorities maintained their stance that Kendrick's death was accidental, the family and supporters pushed back, calling for independent investigations, additional autopsies, and full disclosure of evidence. This dual narrative, the official explanation versus the family's suspicion, became central to the case's enduring controversy, fueling national debates about safety in schools, accountability, and the limits of official investigations in cases involving children and teens. As the weeks passed, every new report, every media interview, and every public statement seemed to deepen the divide between those who accepted the accident narrative and those who believed something far darker had occurred inside that gym. And it was within that tension, the uneasy mix of grief, doubt, and determination, that the story of Kendrick Johnson began to resonate far beyond Valdosta, Georgia, drawing attention from journalists, investigators, and true crime enthusiasts across the country. Immediately after Kendrick Johnson's death became public knowledge, social media erupted with discussion, speculation, and debate. Platforms like Reddit, Facebook, and Twitter became arenas for conflicting narratives, with users dissecting every detail of the case. Some insisted that the GBI's ruling of accidental death was plausible, citing the logistics of the gym mat and the unfortunate timing of events. Others, however, believed that the official account failed to explain key inconsistencies, pointing to injuries highlighted in the independent autopsy and gaps in witness statements as evidence of a possible cover-up. Public threads on Reddit under topics like r/Kendrick Johnson or broader Unsolved Mysteries forums featured hundreds of comments analyzing photos, questioning timelines, and debating whether negligence or foul play could have played a role. Users posted theories ranging from school negligence to deeper conspiracies, and these discussions quickly gained traction, drawing both local and national attention. Alongside online debate, real-world activism grew. The "Justice for Kendrick Johnson" movement emerged as a central hub for supporters and concerned citizens, combining online advocacy with physical demonstrations. Thousands followed updates, shared petitions, and connected with the Johnson family's fight for answers. Local rallies and marches brought together parents, students, activists, and concerned members of the community, all demanding transparency and accountability. Coverage by CNN, ABC News, and the Valdosta Daily Times highlighted these gatherings, noting the intensity of emotion and the sense of collective urgency. Signs reading, "We deserve answers," and "Justice for Kendrick" became common images at events, emphasizing a widespread dissatisfaction with how the case had been handled. Public fascination with the case was fueled by the unusual circumstances of Kendrick's death, the contradictory autopsy reports, and the perception that institutions may have acted too quickly to close the case. For many, Kendrick's story was more than a local tragedy. It became a symbol of systemic failures, of a young life lost under ambiguous circumstances, and of the broader questions about accountability in schools, law enforcement, and investigative processes. News outlets repeatedly emphasized that while some viewed the incident as an accident, the sheer number of voices questioning the narrative kept the story alive in the public consciousness, prompting continued scrutiny and ongoing calls for justice. The convergence of social media speculation, public rallies, and advocacy communities created a powerful force that ensured Kendrick's story could not be quietly forgotten. Each post, each article, each march reinforced a central truth: that the public's attention and pressure could keep the search for answers alive, long after the initial tragedy. It was within this mix of grief, suspicion, and activism that Kendrick Johnson's case transitioned from a local incident to a story with national resonance. The fight for answers in Kendrick Johnson's case quickly moved beyond the gym and the autopsy reports into the courts, where the legal battle would become as complex and controversial as the events themselves. The Johnson family, determined not to let their son's death be swept under the rug, filed multiple lawsuits against the Lowndes County School Board, the Sheriff's Office, and others they believed were responsible or complicit in failing to protect him. Public court documents reveal that the family alleged negligence, civil rights violations, and even conspiracy, claiming that officials had mishandled evidence, suppressed critical information, and failed to maintain a safe environment in which their child could attend school without fear. Among the most significant legal actions was a federal lawsuit filed in 2014, alleging a conspiracy to fabricate evidence in order to support the ruling of accidental death. According to filings publicly available through the United States District Court for the Southern District of Georgia, the lawsuit argued that state and local authorities deliberately misrepresented the circumstances of Kendrick's death, ignored key evidence, and obstructed a proper investigation. The case drew national media attention, with coverage from CNN, ABC News, and the New York Times highlighting the unprecedented nature of a family challenging both local authorities and state investigative procedures in a matter involving a teenager's death. Despite the Johnsons' persistence and the weight of public scrutiny, courts dismissed several key claims, citing insufficient evidence to prove conspiracy or direct negligence. In some instances, the rulings went further, ordering the family to pay attorney fees, a devastating financial and emotional blow to parents already grappling with the loss of their son. Legal analysts and journalists pointed out that these rulings underscored the difficulty families face when confronting institutional authority, particularly in cases involving controversial interpretations of tragic events. Parallel to the civil lawsuits, federal agencies undertook their own reviews. The United States Department of Justice opened a probe into the case, examining whether civil rights violations or criminal misconduct had occurred. Investigators conducted interviews, reviewed evidence, and coordinated with state authorities. However, in 2016, the Department of Justice publicly announced that the federal investigation would conclude without filing any criminal charges. Official statements cited the lack of sufficient evidence to meet prosecutorial standards, a decision that left the Johnson family and supporters frustrated but undeterred. Coverage by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and the Valdosta Daily Times emphasized the tension between public expectation and legal constraints, noting that while no criminal charges were filed, the questions surrounding Kendrick's death persisted. The legal saga also included smaller civil actions, hearings, and filings that continually brought attention back to the inconsistencies in the official narrative. Courtroom footage and media coverage show the Johnsons repeatedly urging the judiciary to consider the independent autopsy findings, the allegations of evidence mishandling, and the potential for negligence that may have contributed to Kendrick's death. While the courts ultimately limited their ability to pursue certain claims, the public record and the family's determination ensured that the case remained in the national spotlight. Even without criminal charges, the legal battles and investigations reinforced the central tension of the Kendrick Johnson story: a teenager lost under suspicious circumstances, conflicting accounts of his death, and a family unwilling to accept closure on terms they could not reconcile with what they knew of their son. The courtroom became another stage for a story that was already deeply entrenched in grief, suspicion, and the demand for justice. It was here, amid filings, hearings, and federal investigations, that the struggle over truth, accountability, and transparency became as real as the loss itself, highlighting the broader challenges faced by families confronting institutions in cases of unresolved deaths. As the years have passed, Kendrick Johnson's story refuses to settle into simple answers. Was his death truly a tragic accident, the result of misfortune in a high school gym? Or does it hide something darker, something deliberate, something that authorities have been unable, or unwilling, to fully uncover? The question itself hangs in the air, unanswered, haunting, persistent. Public records, autopsy reports, court filings, and media coverage all contribute pieces to the puzzle, yet each piece seems to contradict another. The initial GBI autopsy, released in May 2013, concluded accidental death. The independent autopsy, conducted after the family exhumed Kendrick in June of the same year, revealed blunt force trauma near the neck, an anomaly that could not be ignored. Experts quoted in the news reports highlighted the discrepancy, noting that such trauma suggested possibilities beyond a simple accident. Complicating matters further, evidence that might have clarified the circumstances surrounding Kendrick's death was reportedly missing or mishandled, raising questions about procedural failures and potential cover-ups. Eyewitness accounts, student testimonies, and the family's own observations continue to cast doubt on the official narrative. Even federal investigations, including the U.S. Department of Justice probe concluded in 2016, ended without criminal charges, leaving unresolved questions about negligence, foul play, or systemic failures within both the school system and investigative authorities. The human element of this story cannot be overstated. Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson, still grieving, continue to fight publicly for clarity. Interviews and public statements reveal parents whose lives were irrevocably altered, whose trust in institutions was shaken, and whose determination to honor their son's memory drives a relentless search for answers. The emotional weight of this case resonates far beyond Valdosta, Georgia, connecting to anyone who has struggled to reconcile the loss of a loved one with incomplete explanations, conflicting evidence, and the frustration of a justice system that sometimes appears impenetrable. And yet, despite media coverage, online advocacy, and ongoing discussions in national forums, the central mystery remains: how did Kendrick Johnson, a bright and athletic teen, end up dead inside a rolled wrestling mat under circumstances that no one has been able to fully explain? With conflicting autopsies, missing or mishandled evidence, and a family unwilling to accept closure on terms they do not understand, the story of Kendrick Johnson continues to challenge the notion of justice, truth, and accountability. For viewers, the question remains open, lingering like a shadow over an otherwise ordinary high school gym. It is a story that refuses to end neatly, a case where every answer seems to generate yet another question. The uncertainty is what makes this tragedy unforgettable. More than a decade has passed since Kendrick Johnson's death, yet official records continue to list it as an accidental death. The GBI's ruling remains on file, and no criminal charges were ever filed, despite federal investigations and public outcry. But for Kendrick's parents, Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson, the story is far from over. Public statements, interviews with news outlets and the Valdosta Daily Times, along with court documents from their civil lawsuits, reflect a family that refuses to accept closure on terms that conflict with what they know about their son. Every report, every autopsy, every ruling that seems final is met with continued questions, with persistent efforts to uncover the truth behind the gym mat, the injuries, and the unanswered mysteries surrounding his death. The weight of Kendrick's story is reflected not just in legal documents or news headlines, but in the lives of those he left behind. Family gatherings now carry a quieter edge, memorials stand as enduring reminders of a son lost too soon, and public appearances by his parents are acts of both remembrance and advocacy. Photographs show a young man with a bright smile, his presence in athletic events, school programs, and community activities preserved for the world to remember. Clips of court hearings, protests, and rallies highlight the ongoing struggle for accountability and recognition, revealing a family and a community unwilling to let the story fade into obscurity. Kendrick's story is not confined to a gym, to an autopsy, or to courtroom documents. It speaks to broader themes of justice, institutional trust, and the enduring pain of loss when answers remain elusive. It underscores the challenges families face when official narratives conflict with lived experiences, when evidence is contested, and when the search for truth becomes a public mission. For the Johnsons, advocacy has become intertwined with memory, and the fight to hold authorities accountable is inseparable from honoring the life of their son. As the years move on, the case remains a touchstone for discussions about school safety, investigative transparency, and the limits of institutional accountability. It is a reminder that unresolved cases leave marks far deeper than headlines can convey, and that the stories of those left behind are just as important as the events that claimed a life. For viewers, Kendrick's story challenges us to confront uncomfortable questions, to resist complacency, and to consider what it means to demand truth when it is elusive. If you believe Kendrick deserved answers, don't just watch silently. Subscribe and ring the bell, because silence lets unanswered truth fade away. Sharing his story, engaging with the case, and demanding clarity are ways to honor his memory and ensure that the questions his family continues to ask do not go unheard. Kendrick Johnson's life, his death, and the struggle that followed are a testament to the enduring human desire for justice, accountability, and remembrance. We may never know exactly what happened to Kendrick Johnson inside that gym on that cold January morning in 2013. Conflicting autopsies, missing evidence, unanswered questions, and dismissed lawsuits have left more doubts than answers. Yet, one thing is clear: his parents' fight for truth, accountability, and justice is far from over. Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson continue to speak publicly, push for transparency, and keep their son's story alive, refusing to accept a narrative that does not align with the evidence and what they know about their child. For those watching today, Kendrick's story is not just a case, it is a reminder that the pursuit of truth often depends on the collective vigilance of a community. Comment below and share what you think really happened that day. Every voice adds weight to the questions that remain unanswered, every engagement helps keep the story alive, and every conversation pushes for accountability where institutions may have failed. And if you don't subscribe, just imagine being asked one day what you did to help uncover the truth. Don't let this story vanish on your watch. Sharing, subscribing, and engaging isn't just support for a channel, it's support for a family that refuses to stop asking why, and for the memory of a young life that deserved answers. Kendrick Johnson may not have had a chance to finish high school, but his story continues to teach, to provoke thought, and to challenge all of us to care about justice, even when the answers are difficult to face.